Good evening, Dungeon Masters, I'm Baron Durop. The Metroid games are known for a level design that is absolutely epic in scale. There's a lot that we as Dungeon Masters can take away from this classic game to help us design massive dungeon complexes. The series does a few things really well. It shows us how to recontextualize dungeons as players explore them, how to define narratives for each section of a mega dungeon, and shows us how to reward players for exploring the dungeon with further information about the dungeon itself. So let's get into it. When Samus first drops onto the planet Zebes, there really isn't anything she can explore. Descending into the depths, she's stymied by a number of obstacles that stop her from progressing down one of the many forks in the complex. But eventually, she finds an upgrade that unlocks new areas of the game map. Suddenly, places Samus had already visited become new and exciting. Backtracking becomes interesting. We as Dungeon Masters can accomplish this in a number of ways. Probably the easiest is to have some central looping point that players will regularly revisit over and over again through the course of the dungeon's exploration. Of course, just having a series of loops can get really tedious if it's not executed well. Players are going to feel really bored if you constantly re-explain the same octagonal room with 8 wooden doors over and over again. But Super Metroid shows us how to deal with this problem right at the beginning of the game, where at first there was fog and some kind of ominous music in the ruined structure. Your second trip through the area suddenly becomes crawling with space pirates. Let's replicate this. When you're designing your dungeon, start by creating a linear path that takes players to a central hub. Use this initial path to telegraph to the players the kinds of environments and factions they will contend with while exploring the dungeon. If part of your dungeon will be flooded or filled with lava flows, be sure you show them sections of the dungeon which contain these environmental hazards. Are there monsters or factions you want the players to encounter at some point in the dungeon? Telegraph their presence too. The litter around an extinguished campfire, the strange scent of a dung pile, or leftover tools used to topple a statue can go a long way in informing what kinds of problems the party is about to be up against. Get those problems simmering in the players' minds early. Once your players get to the central hub, start to think about how to open up the exploration and shift from a linear to a non-linear movement. Obviously, the players will have far more access to magic and equipment than Samus does in the Metroid franchise, so they aren't going to be completely cut off from all of your paths. But there's a lot you can do to steer players toward specific parts of the dungeon while only partially exposing them to other parts. Using hazards like flowing water or tall vertical surfaces will go a long way into pushing your players into some directions while being less forgiving if they go in others. Imagine a large worship chamber with a huge statue at the back of the room. There could be a few doors at ground level, but what about a balcony with a locked door above, or even a causeway connecting 2 doors high overhead? How would you get up there? Where do those doors take you? And what can you do once you get up there? Players might get up to some shenanigans with teleportation magic and slews of 50-foot lengths of rope, but they are going to expend a lot of resources to do so no big deal. With that said, you can't just have the players return to the central hub to lazily pass through it. Their understanding of this location needs to change every time they do so as well. Did the players notice the statue in the worship hall had 2 deep sockets for eyes? When the players come back through, perhaps they return via a priorly hard-to-reach elevated platform. Now, they can overhear a pair of ogres below lamenting about how they lost the eye stones. Now the players know the stones are somewhere in the dungeon, and more, for some reason, those stones are important. Slowly add to the story of the dungeon as the players use this hub by reinforcing the dungeon's narrative. So we are working on a map layout that loops over itself multiple times like a tangled knot. But how do we give the players some sense of meaningful choice when we present them with 2 or 3 possible paths from this central hub? That's something else Metroid shows us how to do really well, the themed location. In each Metroid game, there are a number of distinct locations that can be explored, each with their own theme. The theme informs the kinds of puzzles Samus encounters, the kind of enemies she battles, and even the information she acquires. Similarly, we can do the same thing to make each section of our dungeon more memorable and distinct from every other part of it. Establish a thesis statement for each section of the mega dungeon. Think about what makes it unique. In the case of Brinstar, for example, we could say, this vine and mushroom covered cave was created when the taproot of a massive tree rotted away. Now we start exploring a long vertical shaft where the taproot was, with various fungi and insects everywhere. This makes other parts of the map feel distinctly unique and different. In Criteria, we are taken to a dark and rainy landscape, rife with caves and deep canyons made from water erosion. So later in the game, when we find a wrecked starship there, it thematically fits that it crashed into a lake. Once you have your theme set, you can really drive it home by modifying the key entrances to those locations so that they are highly foretelling. Metroid does this really well in a few ways. Most bluntly, they mark entrances to the various boss rooms and forecast who Samus will be fighting. Not only do these entrances foreshadow the danger contained within, but by somehow keeping the door out of reach, you help assist the narrative loops for a given area. Players will remember a highly descriptive location, especially if it's clear that it's a transition point to a new area. They're going to want to figure out a way in. Players will develop a sense of wonder if they encounter a door covered in runes and bloody handprints, as opposed to an otherwise mundane door in the same area. Perhaps there's a cult of vampire worshippers that live beyond, and the threshold was painted this way as a warning to other denizens who live elsewhere in the dungeon. Beyond the door, perhaps the rooms seem to have a noticeably cool draft, and everything seems to be spattered with blood. The way Super Metroid gives the player knowledge about the dungeon is the unsung achievement of this video game. Secret areas are telegraphed very well for observant players. Also, sections of the game map can be downloaded from map rooms, giving players a heads up about secret passages they may not have found on their own. The game even telegraphs how to interact with the game world itself to solve some of its puzzles. In one section of the map, the game shows the player a smashed glass tube hallway. Then, elsewhere in the game, the players find a similar tube, but still intact. Would a bomb make it break? One of the best things we can do as dungeon masters is to think about the kind of information that would be relevant to one part of the dungeon, and then somehow connect that information to an entirely different part of it. This is where the two previous concepts tie together. A dead goblin in one part of the dungeon might have a scrawled note in his pocket, detailing problems he encountered in an underground mushroom forest, clearly a different part of the dungeon. Have the players been there? Did they have the same problems? Maybe if they haven't been there, they can use the knowledge gained from that note to avoid those issues. Additionally, having those odd, strange tidbits of knowledge scattered around the dungeon allows your players to lean into divination spells like Detect Magic, Identify, Locate Object, or even Legend Lore. With these scattered MacGuffins and plenty of references to them, the players get to feel super smart for putting together the parts of the larger puzzle. Even more so, it helps make each distinct part of the dungeon feel somehow interconnected. Best still, we as dungeon masters will know what kind of information to provide for divination magic or exceptionally high intelligence checks. Super Metroid has laid the foundation of how to properly design a mega dungeon. Be ready to recontextualize a central looping area to keep it interesting. Break the dungeon up into subsections with their own substory and theme, and use tidbits of that information found in one section of the dungeon to interconnect it to other parts. Next time you design a large dungeon, try doing this yourself. You'll be impressed at how rich and alive your dungeon will feel. Thanks for watching. And until next time, Dungeon Masters, good night.